solving one-step equations. So up to now, in the first 4 sections, we've talked about order of operations, combining like terms, and distribution, and what's the other thing? Let me think. Evaluating. Okay, so plugging in numbers to evaluate. Okay, so we've done all that. So now we're getting to the actual solving equations. This is a review from Algebra 1. Okay, so everybody has done this. We just need to refresh our memory. Okay, your goal is to be able to say, I can solve for a variable by isolating it using an inverse operation. Okay, so we want to solve for a variable by isolating it, and we do that by using an inverse operation. Okay, that means an inverse operation is an opposite operation. Okay, so what is the opposite of addition? What's the opposite of adding? Subtracting. So addition and subtraction are inverse. What's the opposite of multiplication? Good. So multiply and divide are inverse operations. Okay, so when we say by using inverse operations, that's what we're talking about, doing the opposite to get the term by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight my variable. Okay, I'm trying to isolate the variable, the letter. That's not what I'm isolating. Okay, so I'm going to try to get the letter by itself. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to do the opposite operation. Okay, and depending on the setup of the problem, that may be adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. Okay, so we're going to look at all those possibilities. Okay, so in number 1, if I want to isolate, I'm going to go ahead and separate the left and right side of my equations. I'll go ahead and do that on all of these. Get them all set up, ready to go. All right, so now they're all set up, ready to go. So if I want to isolate the P, what is the opposite of plus 6? What do we say the opposite of addition was? Subtraction, right? So the opposite of plus 6 is minus 6. And what you do to one side, how do we keep the equation balanced? What we do to one side, we do to the other. So you have to do it on both sides of that equal sign. So I have to subtract 6 on both sides, which isolates my P, and that is negative 18. Okay, so sometimes it's as easy as subtracting a number. It's whatever the opposite operation is. Okay, so in number 2, the X is what I'm trying to isolate. I want to get the variable by itself. Okay, what's the opposite of subtraction? Guys, we get through this faster if y'all participate. I don't have to wait for answers. What's the opposite of minus? To add, plus. Okay, so to get rid of that minus 1.3, I'm going to add 1.3. What I do to one side, I do to the other. So it eliminates it here, and I got X alone. That was the goal, was to get X alone. Okay, and then on the left side, I just do the addition. Now in your calculators, there's the 4-function calculators. There is not a negative key, so you can't type negative 6.2. So you could type this as 1.3 minus 6.2. That's probably the easiest route. And that would give you negative 4.9. Okay, in number 3, we said the same thing. The opposite of addition, subtraction is addition. So I'm going to add the 45 over to get A by itself. So A, I got it isolated. Okay, and then so you can just type in 45 minus 31 and get 14. You've got to know how to work those 4-function calculators because that's all you're getting on the test. Remember I said practice how you test. So do not practice with the full Desmos. Do not be practicing using the full graphing Desmos because you won't be able to enter it that way on the test. Okay, you have to be able to do it on the 4-function calculator. All right, so those were all adding and subtracting. Okay, then we said the opposite of multiply is divide. So in number 4, to get the variable by itself, D, this 8 is being multiplied. It's -8 times D. So the opposite is to divide. Gentlemen, please stop talking. So I'm going to divide by -8. So we isolated the D. So then in your 4-function calculator, you can type in 72 divided by -8, or you can't type -8. You can type 72 divided by 8, and you get 9. You need to know that a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So this is -9. So you've got to know your signs. Okay, here's another division because 3.4 is being multiplied by M. The opposite is to divide. And what we do to one side, we do to the other. So it isolates the M, which was the goal. And we just type in 119 divided by 3.4, and we get 35. All right, 6 is a little different. It's not multiplication, it's division. Okay, but the opposite operation is still the same. We've been saying the opposite of multiply is divide. So the opposite of divide is what? What's the opposite of divide? Multiply. So to get rid of this -4 that's being divided, I'm going to multiply by -4. And what I do to one side, I do to the other, because that allows the -4 to eliminate and isolate my R. Now, if that confuses you, the way that I wrote a dot for multiply. If that looks like subtraction to you, use parentheses so you know that is multiplication. You are not subtracting 4, you are multiplying -4. But again, you can't type a negative into your 4-function calculator. You can type 12 times 4 and get 48, but you have to know a positive times a negative is a negative. Got to know your signs. All right, last couple. Okay, in 7, we're trying to isolate B. So the opposite of dividing by 6 is to multiply by 6. What you do to one side, you do to the other. So B, we can type all that. 13 times 6 can go in your calculator to equal 78. Now 8 is where it gets a little tricky sometimes. I know this says solving one-step equations, and yes, we can do this in one step written, but when you go to do this in your calculator, it's actually going to be 2 steps because you have a numerator and a denominator of this fraction that you need to get rid of. So what I would do is I would get rid of the denominator first. So right now we're dividing by 3. What's the opposite of divide? Multiply. So I'm going to multiply by 3 to get rid of the denominator. And I'm going to do 3 times 16 in my 4-function calculator. And oops. And that's 48. And I'm left with the -4x. Then, to get rid of the -4 that's being multiplied, I'm going to divide. So that gets rid of the -4. It eliminates. over there. So then I've got 48 divided by 4 that I can enter in my calculator, which is 12. But I need to know that a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So it says one-step equations, but I broke it down into 2 because I think that's easier for you to understand. If you want to do it in one step, okay, when you have it, okay, I'm going to put or, okay, if we have 16 equal to negative 4/3 x, you can do all of that at once by multiplying by the reciprocal. You flip this fraction, you multiply by 3/4 all at once. So you can see that the 3's will eliminate and the 4's will eliminate. And remember, what you do to one side, you do to the other. So you would have to multiply this side by negative 3/4. So you can do it all in one step like that. And if you, in your calculator, you could type -3 divided by 4 times 16. Because remember, division and multiplication are at the same step in order of operations. Or you could do 3 times 16 and then divide by 4. Okay. But your calculator, you're still going to kind of have to enter that in multiple steps. But it gets you -12 either way. So you could, writing it this way, it's one step. I think it's easier for y'all to break it down into 2. Okay, so I'm just going to make a note of what I did up here. Okay. Instead of, because that fraction is being multiplied by x, instead of dividing by a fraction, you can multiply by the reciprocal. The reciprocal, that's a word that means you flipped the fraction. Here, what we did on this side, we broke the fraction into 2 steps. So that was my or. Those were my 2 options. I can do it one of those methods. All right. Out the practice, and y'all are going to be able, and I'm going to tell you which specific problems you're going to do. You're not doing the entire thing again. Everything up to 1.4 is going to be due tomorrow, but 1.5 won't be due until Tuesday, because it kind of goes hand in hand with 1.6, which we're not doing till Monday.